Hey everybody, it's Angela Walters from Quilting is My Therapy. I'm excited to announce a new series where I help you get over your fear of deciding what to quilt. Look, I've been machine quilting for over 15 years, and I've been doing it professionally for over 10. And here's the thing, even though I've been quilting for so long, I still get stumped on what to quilt sometimes. I know, you think I would have it all together. I don't. The thing is, I know what it's like to finish a quilt top and look at it and think, wow, it's finally freaking finished. But how do I quilt it? When I travel and I teach, that's the number one question I get asked. How do I quilt this quilt top? And every time I look over the quilt top and I get the same answer, it depends. I know, isn't that a horrible answer? The problem is, it does depend. It depends on who the quilt is for, what your skill level is, what kind of machine you have. But what I'm doing now is putting together a multi-part series where I give you practical tips on how to pick out designs for those quilt tops you have lying around. Oh, you don't have any unquilted quilt tops lying around? Am I the only one? Okay, well then how about this? I'll help you pick out quilting designs for your next quilt top. The first step to deciding what to quilt is to look at the quilt top and ask yourself what the most important thing about that quilt is. And you get bonus points if you ask it out loud. Angela, what's the most important thing about this quilt? Well, I'm glad you asked, Angela. Let me tell you. No, I'm just joking, of course, but it is a true suggestion. When you can look over the quilt top and you can identify what the most meaningful thing of that quilt is, then you can use your quilting designs to enhance that. I like to think of quilting as that second layer of art that will enhance an area of the quilt. Really, the most important thing about your quilt could be a number of different things. It could be the quilt pattern. Maybe it's that intricate quilt pattern that you finally finished and you're so proud of how those points match up. Let me know how that feels because my points never match. It could be the fabric. Maybe you finally used that out-of-print fabric that you've been curating for the last several years and you're excited to have it actually in a quilt. It could be the recipient. The designs I pick for a quilt would be different depending on if it's going to a 5-year-old boy or if it's going into a quilt show. It could be the quilting itself, which maybe not always be the case, but sometimes you want to show off your fancy quilting skills, right? Or it could even be the story or the inspiration behind the quilt. Maybe there's a special story to your quilt and you want to use the quilting to enhance that. In this series, I'm going to have a video post that goes over one of each of those topics and give you practical tips on how to actually pick out designs for your quilt. What do you think? Are you ready to get started? Well, we're going to start right now. We're going to start with the quilt pattern. What do you do if the quilt pattern is the most important thing about the quilt? How do you enhance that with the quilting? Well, good thing is I have plenty of experience with that. I'm going to give you 3 practical tips to think about when you're picking designs out for those kinds of quilts. The first tip, you ready for it? It's mind-blowing. Echo. Okay, maybe it's not that mind-blowing, but echoing is a great way to highlight the shapes of a block and to also separate that block from the filler. If I ever quilt a quilt for somebody who said, oh, I took this Judy Niemeyer class, I love how all these points come out, then I know my job is to echo, 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 and show off those beautiful points. And here's a great example of using echoing to separate that pattern from the filler used in the background. Around this Y-shaped block, I've used echoing to separate that intricate piecing from all the filler I want to put around it. It's almost like putting a parenthesis around that block saying, hey, just in case you were wondering where to look, I want you to look right here. But echoing doesn't have to go just outside the block, it can go inside the block as well. In this tumbler block, straight out of the book, Quilt with Tula and Angela, I've echoed the inside of the tumbler block to really enhance the shape of that block. Now you'll notice I use different densities depending on the color of the block. I really want to have this nice look of contrast and depth to the block. Or if you like echoing as much as I do, you can echo inside the block and outside the block. In this up-close picture of a quilt I did for Tula Pink, I echoed inside the shape and outside the shape to really enhance the look of that letter and separate it from the filler. So you can echo inside or outside, it really doesn't matter. Second tip would be keep it simple in the blocks. I know it sounds counterintuitive. You would think that if the block is the most important thing, you'd want to put all your intense quilting in there. But actually, I'd rather put all my extra quilting around the outside of it, smash that area down so that block can come up and shine. So when I'm picking the designs for inside the block, I like to keep them fairly simple and fairly basic. Now, I do have to point out that that's subjective. My simple and basic may be your quilting it to death, whatever that means to you. For instance, if you look at this quilt, this is the Ventana quilt by Allison Glass. Even though I'm doing all this intricate stuff in the background of the quilt, I'm keeping it very simple inside the blocks with just some simple diagonal lines. Or here's another example. In this quilt that I did for Tula Pink, I did the echoing around the outside, but I also kept it simple in the blocks with some gentle serpentine lines. Not only does it look great, but it's quicker. And that means you can get done with the quilting faster and start another quilt. It's a win-win. Okay, we've talked about echoing the block to show off the quilt pattern. We talked about keeping it simple in the blocks. And now we're going to talk about how to use the quilting in the background to really help show off that quilt pattern. And this is my favorite part. If your quilt pattern has lots of background or negative space, you could really use the quilting in those areas to enhance the quilt pattern. And you can do this in so many ways. Let me show you a real life example. So I had these 2 quilted X blocks, again by Julie Herman from her book Alphabet Soup. And I quilted both of them differently. In one of them, the quilting extends from the X and really draws your eye to where those lines come together, and it looks beautiful. Well, of course, I'm going to think it looks beautiful because I quilted it. Now, if this were not a block that I pieced well, this is not what I would do around it. That would be like putting eyeliner around my zits, and I try not to do that. I want to use the quilting to highlight the good stuff and then detract from the stuff that maybe isn't as good. And if that happens, I know it's usually because I've pieced the quilt top. But in this second X, I went with lines that extended and echoed past that X. And I really love how it just kind of frames it and enhances that shape as well. So 2 different versions. Which one's wrong? Which one's right? Neither one of them are wrong. They're both right. There are no wrong answers when it comes to picking out the quilting designs for your quilts. Another fun thing I love to do with the quilting in the background is to recreate some of the shapes that are in the quilt pattern. To me, it's just so easy. Somebody's already designed the pattern, worked out the shapes. All I have to do is recreate them in other areas of the quilt. In Emily Sear's crepe hanger quilt, I really loved how she had these lines that wove in and out of each other. It was so cool. And I knew the second I saw it, I wanted to recreate those shapes in the background of the quilt. The idea is that you can make this technique as basic or as complex as you want. If you don't have a lot of time or you don't really love the person that you're making it for, then just do a little bit. If you want to give yourself carpal tunnel and do a bunch of intricate quilting, go for it. This really is up to you. So there are the 3 tips for picking out machine quilting designs to enhance the quilt pattern. Remember though, this is only my opinion. I'm only the expert of my opinion. But the good thing is you're the expert of your opinion. So when you're looking at your quilt, do what you think looks best. Do what you want to do, or do what you know how to do. As long as you end up with a finished quilt, then you've picked the right one. If you have any questions about any of the things I talked about, you can leave them in the comment box below. I love to read it and see what you guys think of the videos. Well, that's it for today. I'll be back soon with that next post. Thank you so much for watching, and happy quilting.